2022 Electoral Area Services Committee, and it's my pleasure to call this inaugural meeting of the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting to order. The first item on our agenda is the election of the chair. So to facilitate this election, I would like to ask for a first call of nominations for chair of the Electoral Area Services Committee, and I see Director Raymond has his hand raised.
I would like to nominate Director Dickey for chair, please.
Thank you, Director Raymond. Director Dickey, do you accept this nomination?
Yes, I do.
Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations for the position of chair for the Electoral Area Services Committee? And for a third and final time, are there any nominations for the position of chair of the Electoral Area Services Committee? Hearing none, I now close the nominations and declare that there will not be an election and confirm that Director Dickey is elected chair of the Electoral Area Services Committee.
Thank you, everyone.
So at this time, Director Dickey or Chair Dickey, I would ask if you would take the position of chair and chair the rest of the meeting, but if that you would direct staff to facilitate the election of vice chair.
Yeah, please go ahead, Ms. Kinnaman.
Thank you. So I will now call for nominations for the position of vice chair for the Electoral Area Services Committee. Is that Director Raymond's hand up again? You're muted, Director Raymond.
I would be pleased to nominate Director Stobart for vice chair.
Thank you, Director Raymond. Director Stobart, do you accept this nomination?
I do.
Are there any other nominations? For a third and final time, are there any other nominations for the position of vice chair of the Electoral Area Services Committee? Well, hearing none, I now close the nominations and declare that there will not be an election and confirm that Director Stobart is elected vice chair of the Electoral Area Services Committee. So Chair Dickey, you do have an opportunity to provide your remarks as chair of the Electoral Area Services Committee.
Thank you, Ms. Kinnaman. Thank you, directors, once again for your support. And especially thank you to Director Bales. Director Bales is the director of a very important electoral area in our committee, and there are a lot of very important initiatives taking place there, and we certainly welcome Wendy's depth of understanding of that community. And in general, thank you to the directors. I think everyone brings a very deep understanding of how it's important that we cooperate in the way we conduct ourselves at this committee level. I think we've been very successful in that regard. And I think we all understand that we may not get everything we want, but it's a case of the majority rules this federation, and we move on to our next battle. But I think this has worked very well. I think the committee operates under a directive where we try and give each electoral area director as much autonomy as possible within their own communities. And that has worked very well, I think. So 2002 is shaping up to have a lot of important initiatives. I think we're guaranteed this is going to be an entertaining year. So I look forward to working with everyone. And with that, I'll turn things back to our CAO.
Thank you, Chair Dickey. So the next item on the agenda is the chair's report on the Regional and Corporate Services Committee meeting from this morning.
Thank you, Ms. Kinnaman. Going through the agenda, Ms. Vugteveen gave us a report on the park system through the atmospheric river. I believe she's going to give us a report also in East, so I'll just comment on some of the directors at RACS, what their comments were to Ms. Vugteveen. Mayor Rob pointed out that the Othello tunnels have really taken a big hit as a result of the environmental issues in November and December. And he pointed out that Othello tunnels draws 100,000 visitors a year to Hope. And he feels that it'll be a number of years before the Othello tunnels likely will reopen. So that's obviously a big concern, especially to Hope and for Area B. There was a report on the UFV, University of Fraser Valley Bachelor Regional and Community Planning Program that's being proposed. Ms. Stewart from our regional planning authored the report, and the directors at RACS feel this is a very important initiative to help develop the personnel that we need in our planning departments throughout the region. During the director's report, I think the EA directors were pointing out the lack of resources that we have to respond to an event of the magnitude that we saw in November and December. And that's a really big concern, and it's something that we should really address with the province going forward, not just for our own regional district, but province-wide, that there needs to be a better, excuse me, a better procedure to deal with these events. And Director Raymond pointed out about the issues they've had up in Boston Bar, removal of ambulance services, and how that really isn't an acceptable thing to happen in a remote community like Boston Bar. And the other municipal directors pointed out that it's not only in outlying areas, but within the municipalities also, the ambulance services has seen a lot of cutbacks and lack of availability. And I think that was all that was really talked about during the open session of the RACS committee this morning. Turn things back to Ms. Kinnaman.
Thank you. So looking for approval of the agenda, addenda, and late items.
For a motion. Moved, I believe that
Adamson.
was Director Adamson, second Director Dixon, all in favor. Contrary, motion carries.
Director Dickey, oh, I see that Director Bales had her hand raised. I'm not sure if that was to second the motion or if she had a question.
Director Bales?
No, it was just a second or whatever.
Good.
Okay.
Thank you, Director Bales. Turn things back to Ms. Kinnaman.
Thank you. So 7.1 is the draft Electoral Area Services Committee meeting minutes of November 12th, 2021.
Move Adamson.
Move Director Adamson, second.
Engar.
Director Engar, any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor? Contrary, motion carries.
Moving down to 8.1, we have an EOC operation update from Graham Danilus, and I was hoping that perhaps over the next couple months, this would be a bit of a standing item on our committee agenda, just to keep both the board and the community aware that things are still ongoing in our organization and out in your communities, and just to get some brief information on that. So I'll turn things over to Mr. Danilus.
Thank you, Chair. Am I coming through? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, sounds good, Graham. Thank you.
Okay, I'm attempting to share my screen. I've got a few presentation slides. There we are. Is that showing up on your monitors? Brief update 2021 Atmospheric
Yes.
River event?
Yes, it
Yep.
is.
Terrific. Well, thank you. No, thank you so much for your time on the agenda today. My intention is to provide a short update on some of the activities of the Emergency Operations Center over the last number of weeks. I didn't prepare this as any kind of comprehensive update, but rather a brief briefing to let you know where we're at and to share a few thoughts about what I think could be our next steps and what the future might hold for us. You'll know that over the course of the last couple of months, we responded to over 60 incidences of flooding or slope movement or a variety of other types of incidents across the electoral areas of the region. they were all electoral areas had at least one incident, and you can see from the map on the screen there, they were spread out over a large geographic area, but particularly concentrated in the Chilliwack River Valley, and but also the Hatzic Valley, and of course the Othello Road area and the Coquihalla and Laidlaw and the Fraser Canyon. The situation, as you know, involved 3 atmospheric river events, and we're all familiar with that term atmospheric river. Now, I think these are intense rainfall events that come in moisture delivered by the atmosphere. We might have called these Pineapple Express events in the past, but we received 3 very intense rainfalls and back to back over a very short period, and that generated floods and landslides across the region, not just, of course, in the electoral areas, but CMS Prairie and elsewhere, other parts of the province as well. And that meant that there were multiple simultaneous incidents going on at one time. There were highway closures and road closures. And of course, that meant for us that evacuation routes were limited and in some cases non-existent. There was no way to evacuate people from communities. But it also meant that we couldn't get places, we couldn't get information, we couldn't send people out, people couldn't get into our emergency operations center, response crews couldn't get to locations. It disrupted supply, not just of things like commodities like gasoline, but supply of, say, geotechnical experts. We couldn't get geotech experts out to look at sites at times. And as you know, hundreds of travelers were stranded within the electoral areas of the region, travelers on provincial highways stranded between mudslides, for example. And at the same time, there were widespread power outages, which was a further dynamic that residents, and of course, we had to deal with in our emergency operations center. And for us, that meant that we had a very rapidly changing event on our hands with incidences everywhere, very limited information flow, hard to get good information on incidences and ground conditions and locations that were over an hour away that we couldn't reach, we couldn't send people to. We relied heavily on our volunteer firefighters, and in some cases, simply residents who were willing to volunteer and move around their community and record what they saw and let us know. Resources, and not just our own resources, but resources broadly at the ministry and in the private sector were stretched to their limits. And that meant that in most cases, we had a reduced set of options over what we might have in a smaller or less widespread event. Our electoral area saw very broad impacts. We issued 27 evacuation orders or alerts. And in total, these affected over 2,000 properties, about 700 of which, just below 700, were subject to evacuation orders. That doesn't mean that all 700 of those properties were evacuated. Some people chose to stay or made other arrangements, of course, but that's about 700 properties subject to evacuation orders. And all in all might be, estimate 5,600 people directly affected by evacuation orders or evacuation alerts. We still have 3 evac orders in place: Wilson Road, Othello Road, and Lawrence at a Creek, which is a creek in Laidlaw. Those affect perhaps 10 properties. The rest of the evacuation orders and alerts have been rescinded. We see widespread damages. We really don't know how many structures, for example, were affected by flooding, but I think a reasonable guesstimate at this time would be, 300 or 400 electoral area structures with some level of flood damage. Some of those, many of them, I would suggest, have minor damage from flooding, but some quite significant. And 10 homes or properties either entirely destroyed, eroded away by the Coquihalla River, or subject to changes in slopes that render entire properties unsafe to occupy. Infrastructure damage all over the place, damage to our own infrastructure, like the Wilson Road Dike, which we lost a portion of the dike during the event. Our Frost Creek Dike sustained a high level of damage, and we have debris basins in Frost Creek and Rexford Creek and behind Baker Trails. These sustained damage as well. Our parks and utilities, I won't enumerate those damages, but our own parks and our utilities sustained a variety of damages. And But I highlight too that there are orphan flood protection structures like the small berm at the top of Belgrove Creek, that's Leisure Valley, and riprap along the Chilliwack River, and these orphan structures that are really meaningful for communities, but they're orphan in the sense that there's no agency, government, or group that's responsible for them. These are damaged, in some cases destroyed, and that's something we'll need to get a better understanding of as we move into recovery. And I'll highlight two pipelines. Of course, the Enbridge pipeline on the Coquihalla River was entirely exposed, and Enbridge cut the flow and secured the pipeline, but the Trans Mountain pipeline sustained various damage as well. This slide highlights the scale of our expenditure authorization requests. And what's more important to me in this slide is less the dollar figure and more the magnitude, what it tells you about the scale of the event and the scale of our response costs. But we made 104 what we call EAFs. EAF is a expenditure authorization form. It's the mechanism. It's one of a couple of mechanisms we have for asking the province to pre-approve expenditures for us when we're in an emergency response mode. We submitted 104 EAFs and I don't know, 20 or so other resource requests to the province. And the approved requests total almost $4 million. We've got another $933,000 in pending approvals, and we were denied a similar amount. To date, we've claimed about 350,000 of those dollars. That's work to date that we've submitted claims for. That tells you we have a lot more work to go to deliver on our response program of work. And it just, again, it emphasizes the scale and scope of efforts.
Can I ask a question?
Please do.
Why were the ones that weren't approved? What made them be denied?
A variety of reasons, and we don't always have a clear or well-articulated rationale during the course of the emergency response. Of course, the province is under the same kinds of pressures that we faced with being inundated with requests and having a great number of incidents across the southern part of the province. And so they're responding as best they can, just like we were.
Okay,
But
thanks.
sometimes our requests were refused because the province didn't view them as response costs, but rather projects that we should bring forward in the recovery phase. And there's quite an important distinction between response costs, which are, if they are approved, funded at 100% by the province, and recovery costs, if they're eligible, which are covered 80% by the province. So the province is quite sensitive to that distinction, and they will at times refuse a response cost and suggest that you reapply through the DFA program as a recovery cost.
Okay.
Can I have a question too, Director Dixon?
Please.
Okay, thank you. This is not necessary for you, Mr. Daniluz. I'm just thinking, I certainly know in the case of Area H, something that may be approved under the DFA for 80%, we have no ability to get the 20. We don't have the 20% lying around in any of our funds because everything is service area, as you know. Is there a process? Are we thinking of bringing this concern forward provincially at some point?
Yes, we certainly have already brought that concern forward a number of times, and we'll do so again, even more. In the course of we'll talk a little bit later in this presentation about the recovery phase, and in the course of recovery, we need to identify these kinds of projects like Belgrove Creek in your community, Director Dixon, where we may be eligible to receive recovery funding, but we don't have any mechanism. There's no service area and we have no budget to cover 20% of the costs. And in a small creek like Belgrove Creek, the overall costs are not particularly great, but in other communities, the 20% of, say, $1 million is a lot of money to try to come up with. But the money is only a part of the picture. Bear in mind that completing these projects requires a great deal of staff resources and time. And that's another critical shortage we face in our ability to deliver recovery projects in the months ahead.
Okay, thank you.
In our Emergency Operations Center, on average, over November 14th to December 18th, we had 25 to 35 people in our EOC, most of those being our own staff. About a third of our Chilliwack office staff participated in the Emergency Operations Center. And again, just to give you a sense of scope and scale, the period November 14th to December 12th, we incurred $160,000 in overtime costs alone. Those costs are covered by the province as response costs. But again, these numbers are here to give you a sense of the effort involved in the scope and scale. Our own staff from all of our teams and departments contributed. And I have to tell you, our people in our organization, we have really amazing people. And I'm so impressed with the way our own staff stepped up. We had people operating in roles that they're entirely unfamiliar with, that under incredibly stressful circumstances with a high level of uncertainty, having to figure out how to do things that they didn't know how to do. And that, I would suggest, is a reality of an emergency. And I'm incredibly impressed how our staff stepped up. They were all about doing what they could for others. It wasn't about their own individual interests. They came forward, they volunteered their time to serve in the EOC and functioned at an incredibly high level. And I'm so impressed with them and really proud of the work of our staff. And we're fortunate that we have these kinds of people in our organization. But it isn't just our own folks. There's Team Rubicon, I'm so impressed with. We imported people from other organizations. Right now, we have Natalie from the District of West Vancouver in a communications role doing an incredible job. Some of your residents really stepped up and were selfless in their support for our emergency response, and our emergency social services providers, partners like Camp Hope, do an incredible job. It's it'll be one of the lasting legacies for me of this event, is how I am impressed with these people who step up selflessly and give tirelessly during these kinds of events. Our ongoing priorities, right? We continue, our Emergency Operations Center continues to be active at level 1. If you were in the EOC when we had 25 people, that would be a level 3 Emergency Operations Center. We shrunk that down. We're operating at level 1, and that means that we've probably got 7 people, somewhere in 6 or 7 people working in our EOC. We're not in the boardroom, we're at our desks working virtually and balancing to some degree our regular job duties with our EOC responsibilities. For me, the balance is probably 90-10, 90 EOC, 10 regular. It varies from person to person at this point, and I hope that balance will shift more next week and the following. We have lots of projects to do still, our response projects, which I will show you a list of in a moment. Another priority right now is to support residents. I mentioned we've got 10 households that have lost their homes, in some cases catastrophically, land and house eroded away by the river and entirely gone. In other cases, houses remain relatively intact, but the level of risk associated with the slope above the house is so high that they're not safe to occupy any longer. You can imagine the strain and the disruption and the stresses that these folks face. And it's our priority right now to support them in their engagement with the province and to help them in whatever way we can. We're putting a lot of effort right now on communications. You'll see letters going out to residents, updates on our social media and webpage, hoping to keep people informed and share information. Another round of letters will go out to share new geotechnical or river hazard information with people. We've got a responsibility to share that kind of info when it comes our way. And that means there's probably 70 properties or so where we've had some level of geotechnical review or comment by professionals about river or slope or stream hazards in the area, and we want to share that. Another priority is that when these kinds of events happen, we need to learn from them. We call that an after action review. Right now, we've got a responder and a public survey on the go. We want to get people's feedback about how we operated during the event, how we communicated, what we could do better, what the gaps are, what we did well, what we need to change. And we'll build on these surveys with the formal review, January 20th and 21st, I think, and a report that comes out that documents what we learned, what we succeeded at, what we'd like to do better, what we need to do differently next time. That's our after action review.
Quick question, if I may, Graham.
Yes, please.
And what's the process then for that responder and public survey?
We've got web-based surveys, and people can, we've also sent out paper copies of our public survey with 700 or so letters that are going out to all the properties that were subject to evacuation orders. I've also sent links to the survey around to all of you in the hopes that you might distribute it through your email and other networks and social media accounts or community associations and so on, and get it out to residents. We really like to have a strong response and get people's honest feedback, honest criticism, honest, hopefully there's some things we did well that people will comment on as well. We just want genuine feedback. It's critical that we learn when we face these kinds of pressures.
That's very good. If I may, could you also send me the slides or even just the data, whatever is easiest for you? I don't want to take any more time than necessary, but the slides that showed the actual number of ongoing issues that you've struggled with over this last month. I think that's very important for the public to know, in asking them for a survey response, to also let them know just how hard you guys have been working. So anything you can send me that summarizes that, much appreciated.
Certainly, I can do that. We're working also now to transition from our emergency response and our emergency operations center to a recovery phase where we will have a small recovery team carry forward. And that lets our staff get on with their regular work and transition some of these ongoing efforts that'll happen over the next 6 or 12 months even to a recovery manager position that's funded by the province. More on that in a moment. Here's a list of our response projects, some of which are complete, some are in progress. Where you don't see any status indicators, those are not started yet. This may not be an exhaustive list, but these are many of the projects that we've got on the go right now or we've relatively recently completed. I won't go through them, but you may have questions about these later, and I'll share the slides, of course. Recovery after events like these take longer, I think, than any of us expect, any longer than any of us want. A 6 or 12 month period is certainly a realistic projection for a recovery phase. Frankly, people's lives will take longer to rebuild and return to normal than 12 months. But in terms of our activity, 6 or 12 months I think is a reasonable expectation for this recovery period. We have an opportunity to engage a recovery manager. This would be a position that would be totally funded by the province to come and work within our organization on recovery work. And the kinds of things that we would envision for this recovery phase is to coordinate the completion of those response projects. I just showed you a list, and potentially a variety of other recovery projects. And these could be physical projects, removing sediment from streams, etc. Needs to be more conversation about that with you, especially about that unfunded portion of the work and our capacity to deliver those kinds of projects. There's also, I think, a really large workload associated with the financial and documentation side of an event like this. So far, for example, we've processed about 150 invoices, but that's in addition to the invoice loads that are normal for us in our organization. So our finance team bears a big brunt in assembling the financial reporting and documentation that enables us to get the money back from the province. And that's for perspective, we are still working on getting some money back from the province for an event for expenses that we incurred in February 2020. It's a big body of work, and we need to bring somebody in that's going to help with that and alleviate some of that burden on our finance team. a traditional component of recovery is going out to communities and hearing what people's experience was and identifying any unmet needs. And very often it's not a case of us meeting unmet needs, but connecting people with the Red Cross and other service providers that can help. And of course, I mentioned these 10 property owners that are in very dire circumstances with respect to their property. They're going to need ongoing assistance in working with the province on DFA claims, in expressing the concern that disaster financial assistance limits the payout to $300,000, when these people whose homes have been destroyed, their homes and properties are worth 2 to 5 times that amount. So that's a very large gap that those folks are facing down right now. The prospect of receiving, say, $300,000 on a property worth over $900,000, where they may have mortgages and other things, it's a very difficult situation. And we want to be standing next to those property owners and helping them in their dialogue with the province. And of course, there's ongoing liaison with the province on recovery needs, how we might fund recovery projects that we don't have 20% for, and all kinds of other things that I think we're gonna see play out over the next 6 or 12 months. Over the last couple of months, I mentioned already that a third of our staff have participated in the EOC, and just a very kind of rough and dirty estimate, that may well be 9,500 hours of just regular staff time that work. These are hours that our staff would do during doing the normal kind of work that we do on a day-to-day basis. And that work didn't get done because these folks were in our emergency operations center responding to the event. So that means that there's a backlog and delay in our normal work. And I believe we have to adjust our expectations. This is not like falling behind when we're out for a stroll and then we can double time it and get caught up. We can't get caught up on that work. We can't make up for that 2 months of lost time where up to a third of our staff are responding to emergencies. I believe we need to accept that our projects and our workloads are delayed and adjust our expectations accordingly. But there's related impacts. It's not just the lost time. We have some of our staff put in a great number of hours over a couple of months, and they're facing the fatigue of that strain. And not only is it purely an hours worked kind of strain, but it's talking with property owners who have lost everything. It's working under very stressful circumstances where with incomplete information and very high consequences. If we make mistakes, it has we feel the weight of the decisions that are made in the EOC and the actions that are taken. So there's a fatigue factor that I think is going to be with us for some time. Many of us have deferred time off. There's 2021 vacation time, for example, that people forego, that are pushed ahead to 2022, and that means we'll lose more time next year to vacations that should have been taken in 2021. And all of this, I think, leads to customer service frustrations on both sides of the counter. The folks who are looking for us to advance applications or do any number of things, they'll be in a level of annoyance, I think, at the delays and the backlog. And of course, our staff, maybe some of whom might be facing fatigue or haven't taken much time off and gone through this event where people have lost their homes and their lives have been at risk. Sometimes when you're talking across the counter at about much more minor issues and facing annoyance and so on, it's harder to maintain perspective in circumstances like that. So I believe these are related impacts that we should be aware of in the months to come.
Davidson?
Hi, Director Davidson.
Yeah, I just, on the managing expectations slide, it does sort of segue back to the one of my favorite subjects is a work plan, and keeping those dates up to date, because if you look at it, a third of Chilliwack staff basically diverted away from their normal stuff for 2 months. That's 5% of total staff capacity for the year. But I'm guessing that some departments are probably affected differently than other departments, depending on what staff you pulled into the EOC. And, if by having that work plan kept up to date, we could see, okay, well, this has been pushed back, this hasn't, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's difficult to adjust expectations when we don't really know what to expect frequently. Just one comment.
I can address that a little bit, Director Davidson. In fact, our senior leadership team met last week to discuss that very issue, and I am working on the 2022 work plan to bring that forward to the board so that everyone has a very clear understanding of what's going to be possible for 2022. That, of course, will connect with the budget. So as we restart the budget process, there are going to be some projects that have to go forward anyway, regardless of reduced capacity. So absolutely 100%. I know it is your favorite topic, and you're going to have your wish granted, because I think it's going to be important for all of us to constantly be looking at that list of work, not just for the community expectations and for the board expectations, but I think even just for the staff to have some sense of what is actually doable, and it will address some of these related impacts that Graham is talking about, that we have been repeating over and over about staff fatigue and absenteeism.
Great, thank you. And it's the timing of it. I realize timing for anything right now is a challenge, but it's a very useful artifact to have to go into budget discussions. But hopefully we'll get there at some point. But thank you.
I want to point out at the close of my presentation here that we're facing, I think, a new risk profile in our communities. We see in some locations that our post-event risk is escalated. And I'm talking more specifically about things like slopes in the Chilliwack River Valley that are changed because of this event. And as a result of those changes, the risk is greater. We know about some of them through the geotechnical assessments that were done over the course of the event, but there are probably locations where we don't currently have any more information about. And so we need to be aware that the risk after the event is escalated from what it was before. We've also got streams that we see a lot of gravel and other material deposited in stream channels, and that reduces their capacity to convey water flows. And that's really relevant in a place like Hatsa Prairie and Hatsa Valley, where there's an ongoing flood issue associated with gravel and sand buildup in streams. And we've seen an awful lot of debris built up in Hatsa Valley streams over the last 2 months. And that means that the community is at a higher risk of flood than it was at the beginning of November. The bigger picture is that I believe we're at an overall increased risk from a changing climate and environment. And these kinds of events, these kinds of atmospheric river events, I think we need to anticipate in the future. Hopefully not this widespread, hopefully not 3 back to back, but we saw a single atmospheric river event in February of 2020 that caused fairly significant damage then. And I think we're going to have more of these in the future. And we will need to adjust the way we address emergency management and improve the resiliency of our communities to these kinds of events. And I certainly don't have all the answers to that big question at the moment, but I do want to flag it. Thank you so much for your time today. I took up a fair bit of it. I do realize, and I probably presented you with less information than what you would like, but I am grateful for the opportunity to share a bit of our experience, some of the numbers that we're working with, and maybe help to shape our expectations moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dan Lewis, for a very nice summary of a very complicated subject. Directors, any questions or comments?
Dixon.
Go ahead, Director Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just really wanted to take thought Mr. Dan Lewis did such a fabulous job of thanking his staff and, saying how proud he was of him. And I appreciate that. But I also wanted to shout out to you, Mr. Danilus. You were just an amazing leader during what is a really stressful time. And thank you for your calmness and keeping us on track and on board and informed. It was very well done and very much appreciated.
Thank you,
Mary.
Director Dixon.
Wendy?
Go ahead, Director Bales.
Okay, I heard that Lake Eoc is under stress due to possibly the gravel pit or whatever. I just wondered if you had any other information on that.
No.
And that there might be further to do with that.
Director Bales, I'm not aware of any kind of flood or debris or slope movement event in Lake Eoc associated with the gravel pit. We did receive a resident report yesterday about water from Pie Creek in the Lougheed Highway area and possibly flooding the road. That's the most recent report that we received. There was a small slide on the slope down into Lake Eoc itself. It didn't threaten any homes or anything. A small slope movement, we're aware of that as well. And some more localized flooding around Elbow Creek and a few other locations, but I haven't, I'm afraid I'm not aware of any incidents that are connected to the gravel pit at Lake Eoc.
Okay, other directors, any issues?
Director Engar?
Yeah, go ahead, Director Engar.
Thanks, Chair. And thank you, Graham. I want to echo Director Dixon's applause of the fantastic job you did. You're a very modest but very capable leader, and it was really good to have you in that position. So I also want to ask you, going forward, I know time is precious and the challenges that you're facing, you've eloquently shared them with us. I want to make sure that I'm not hounding you unnecessarily, but there will be times when I need to know certain things with some of the folks that have been displaced and are facing the province down and looking for avenues to approach the province, which is ongoing now. And I've been in communication with those folks. So what would you suggest as a good way to follow up with you on a regular basis to as things crop up and I need to have some more feedback without burdening unnecessarily?
I appreciate your need for information, and please just call and if I'm not responding to an email quickly, I welcome a second one. Just say it. This is a particularly pressing issue, and I will get back to you. And I apologize. I know at times my responses have been slowed. I think we're moving into a phase now where the demands on our time are less critical, less urgent, and hopefully become more like routine business. So you should find me responding more quickly back to more of a normal environment. So, but if I'm dropping the ball or missing something or not getting you what you need because you've got a pressing issue, please just tell me. I won't see it as hounding, and I would welcome it. In fact, you would be doing me a service by reminding me.
Thank you. No worries. And I never felt like you're not dropping the ball or anything like that. So just wanting to make it easy for you as I go forward. I really appreciate all the work you're doing and recognize the challenges that you face. So thanks. I will. Take care.
Good. Thank you, Director Engar. Director Adamson, go ahead.
Yeah. The Lorenzensi Creek in Laidlaw that was on the list. Residents have told me that if you remove the gravel where it comes out out of the run in the river, just below that, it's piled up with gravel. They said if you take that away, it would make it flow better, like, dredge and make it flow better. I think we gotta, we all love fish and we want fish to be good, right? Have a place to live in that, but I don't know myself. I think it's well, I'm not an expert or anything, but I have a creek in my yard, and and the last flood, it went up 7 feet higher, moved everything around. And I guarantee you, the fall the salmon will be there. They're always there. So I don't know. We got to dredge. That's one of my things. That's all I'm saying here. Okay, thanks, guys.
Good, thank you, Director Adamson. Other directors,
Chair, may I give you an update on Lorenzetta Creek?
please.
That's the area in Laidlaw where we continue to have an evacuation order that affects, I believe, 2 properties. Lorenzetta Creek jumped its banks and it's flowing across a blueberry farm and really causing, at this point, I'm afraid, possibly damage that it will take a very long time to recover in terms of the owner's efforts to farm the land. A lot of loss of soil, for example, and loss of a blueberry crop, maybe not only the crop, but the plants themselves, which would be quite devastating for the owner. We had that stream assessed by river engineers. We came up with a mitigation plan, a plan to return the creek back to the basin. We submitted a request to the province. It was refused. We submitted a revised request to the province for a lesser scope of work that would involve getting the water flow back returned to the stream channel and off the field. So that would involve definitely some debris removal from the stream itself and getting the stream back into its channel. We submitted that 2-3 weeks ago. I've been speaking to the province every day about it. In fact, 3 times yesterday, waiting for an answer. I suspect maybe Monday we'll have word on whether our revised proposal will be received. DFO is not a barrier, but incidentally to these works in the streams. We've engaged with DFO and we have a pre-approval for emergency works on Lorenzetta. And so it's habitat considerations are really critical, but DFO also recognizes that during emergencies works have to happen and they just want to make sure they're done in the best way possible. So the fisheries concerns are not what's preventing those works from occurring. It's the funding approval from the province.
Good, thank you, Mr. Danilus. Directors.
Stobart.
Go ahead, Director Stobart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, also wanted to express my thanks to the entire team for handling things the way they did over such a long period. Especially you, of course, Graham, and the way it was managed. The longest stint on a EOC was about 4.5 days, and that seemed like forever. So I just can't imagine what it was like for you guys. Also, I want to thank for the work that went through and getting the Taylor Road section of that dike fixed, and the extra work that of course took or entailed involved with the First Nation and federal government and others. So I know, again, a lot of time and a lot of effort, but it's truly appreciated, and just want to say thank you.
Good, thank you, Director Stobart. Other directors.
Wendy?
Go ahead, Director Bales.
I want to thank Director Danilus too for all the work. I was down for the count, but I really appreciate the work that was done. And Area C was not as hard hit, but I did hear things. Yeah, that's about it.
Good, thank you, Director Bales. Sounds like we're pretty well run through everyone. I too would like to thank Mr. Danilus and all the staff. Such a very impressive consultation policy with directors that was put forward during this event. The daily meetings every afternoon, us getting together and talking about what was happening and what responses were being made. I just found that so important. Otherwise, I really wouldn't have had an understanding of what was taking place. So I think that was a really great policy. I've never seen that done before after 20 years here. So I think certainly you deserve a lot of credit for putting that together so quickly. Something that I found as a result of this is that it became so evident so quickly that the procedure that's in place for electoral areas to respond to these events in concert with the provincial government is perhaps not ideal. I always think about what an organized procedure there is in place when there's a wildfire in the province. There's this huge machine all ready to go, and things ramp up very quickly. But to me, this is an analogous type of an event, yet there really doesn't seem to be anything in place to respond in the same way. And I really think we need to talk to the province about working on that and being better prepared in the future. That really is not a criticism of the province. Especially our local MLAs worked very hard through this event, and everything I hear is the province were doing their best. But I really think that procedurally we need to get something better in place. I've spoken with Grace McGregor, who's our electoral area rep at the UBCM, and have a telephone call scheduled for tomorrow morning with her to bring this up, and really think that maybe this is something that should be taken up at the electoral area forum in April, whereby we work together as a group of provincial electoral areas, try and work with the province rather than us trying to take this on individually. Yeah, I think that was all I really had to say in regards to this event. So thank you once again, staff and all the directors. I'll turn things back to our CAO.
Thank you, Chair Dickey. So next on our agenda is 8.2, which is a presentation from our Parks and Recreation team and Christina Vuktaveen.
All right, can you hear me okay?
Sounds good.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. I'm going to ask Jamie to bring the presentation up on the screen, please. So you've just heard and certainly lived through what we experienced in the Emergency Operations Center. This presentation is intended to just give you a little bit of a snapshot of what we saw in our parks, as well as our recreation center and our air park in terms of response and what we saw on the ground. Many of our team were deployed in a variety of areas, helping with the emergency response in the communities, but also helping assessing what's happening in our infrastructure. So this is just to give you a bit of an overview. Next slide, please. So we'll start with our parks and trails. Next slide, please. So we had affected parks and trails, of course, all over the geographic region. The parks and trails that you see in front of you are probably the ones that we'll talk about today. We have not had a chance yet to assess everything because, of course, after the events happened, more rain and snow and ice and things hit. And so we're still in the process of being able to access certain areas and things like this. But this is what we know as right now. Next slide, please. So at Cascade Falls up in Area F, there was more water coming over those falls than we've ever seen it. It was really quite a sight to behold. And the whole infrastructure held up really well. Because of the amount of rainfall and the conditions up there, we need to do professional assessments, including on the bridge and slope stability. And fortunately, everything came back. It's in good shape. We are still dealing with some trail erosion and some trees in the area, but the park is open and people are enjoying it on a regular basis. Next slide, please. You'll just see a picture of some of the water coming over. If I can find the video, I will send it out to you. It's really quite impressive. Next slide, please. At Nielsen Regional Park out in Mission, of course, with the water coming up from the lake there, we had footbridges shift off footings. There was some log jam that happened in Draper Creek, and there's some silt removal that also needed to take place. So we're just in the middle of working through that. Of course, since then, we've had some extreme cold weather and we've had some pipes burst and things like that in the park. So we're just working systematically through that to ensure that our park is open and ready for a picnic season when it's even usually used even more. Next slide, please. At Island 22 in Chilliwack, of course, we have one of the larger boat launches in the region. You'll see in front of you a photo that depicts the silt deposit one day, and we put up some cones where it was best to launch on that particular day. Next slide, please. We were successful in getting funding, which Graham talked about earlier, for cleanup of this site. And the work is still actually ongoing because you have to take a little bit off, you have to pile it, you have to let it drain. We're dealing with snow, freezing, all these types of things. So the work is ongoing. But we were fortunate enough to get funding for this cleanup, which is certainly very helpful. Next slide, please. You'll see a photo here of some of the activities that happened during that time. It became actually a transportation hub up and down the river. We heard stories of people bringing supplies out to people who are stranded in Hope and beyond. We heard of people driving boats into Matsqui Prairie, launching from here, into the Sumas Prairie to go help with rescue efforts and supply drops and things like that. So all kinds of activities happening based out of this park, which was quite something to see. So getting that cleared was really important for our water users. Next slide, please. Thacker Regional Park out in Hope, there was certainly some trail erosion, and there's some sediment in things in the different waterways and creeks that we will be looking at. Additionally, from the atmospheric river event in 2020, we still have an outstanding funding request with the province of some damage that was done on that particular time frame. And we're still working through that with them. There was additional damage, of course, as you've heard, in the Othello tunnels, which is under the jurisdiction of BC Parks. And so continuing to work with BC Parks and the province in that area to talk about improvements and how we can possibly work together and work through these issues. Next slide, please. On Sumas Mountain, we have not been able to access all of the trails, but as you can imagine, there is a number of trees down, bridges that were taken out, etc., over trails. But from a major infrastructure perspective, we didn't see, to date anyways, too much that was very, very costly and concerning. And the parks, actually, the rest of the parks in Abbotsford that pay into the service area, Matsqui, as well as Glen Valley, there was no report of damage, or it was very minimal. So that was good to see. Next slide, please. In Eagle Point Area C, much of the trail, there's significant erosion, and the footbridge did shift off its footings. We have secured that again, and we'll be continuing to work on the trail in that particular area. And the next slide, please. Area H, all the way along the roadside trail at various points. We saw lots of trail erosion. And again, working with our different partners to fix and understand who can fix it to make sure that it's safe for everybody to be in there. So we're continuing to work through that. Next slide, please. So we also, as you are aware, operate the regional air park in Hope. In a regular year, as of late, we see approximately 400 flights come in a year, and it's predominantly used for recreation, plane enthusiasts. We have a caretaker there who takes care of it, mows the lawn, does basic maintenance, etc. And this event, certainly with the highways cut off and people stranded in Hope, changed the nature of the air park and the response that was needed. So that's what this next couple slides will show you. Next slide, please. This is just a photo of some of the helicopter that landed for a variety of reasons. Next slide, please. So I think the day after this started, I got a call from the operator, and he said, oh, we're having people show up here and chartering flights. And within the span of about 5 days while those highways were shut off, there was between 400 and 500 flights that landed at the Hope Air Park and took off. So that's more than we see in a typical year. Because it's an unregulated Air Park. We worked with Nav Canada to put in a system so people or the planes could pre-book their times to land. There was anything from medical flights to supply drops to coming to pick up people to bringing technical experts in. And so we were also successful in this area in getting additional support from the province to be able to support the needs of the air park at that time with additional staffing and resources to keep the operation continuing on and supporting the larger needs in Hope and the broader area. Next slide, please. There was about 140 vehicles that were parked around the air park, people who were stranded in the area and decided to take a flight out of town. And so we worked closely with the district in terms of coming up with a parking plan and keeping those vehicles safe as well while people went on their way. Next slide, please. You'll see a variety of conditions that we're working in then and now. The picture of the tractor that you're seeing in front of you is actually working to just clear the emergency landing space and the helicopter space. So lots of air ambulance traffic that comes in and out of there as well. And conditions were changing by the hour, it seemed like. And so they're working really hard to keep it open so that people can get goods to and from and people to and from that area. Next slide, please. This is an example of working with the fire department. This is an example of a supply drop that came into the town. There was many supplies that came in. Some had an intended location, some did not, and we had to find an intended location. So the community outpouring and support for the people in Hope definitely was shown through what was coming into the air park. So that's just an example of what's been happening. We're continuing to be very, very busy at the air park. There certainly is a lot of industry traffic still coming in and out, helping with repairs, going up the Coquihalla, Boston Bar, technical experts, those types of things, supply drops still in the larger area, and a lot of clearing and snow clearing, of course, with the recent weather events as well. So it continues to be busy, and air traffic is still up. So it is definitely a very important transportation hub for the greater area over there. Next slide, please. So the Hope and Area Recreation Center is the last area I'm going to talk about today. Next slide, please. So in this event, of course, we lost power, unfortunately, at the Recreation Center for almost 2 days, which almost means we almost lost the ice, but we didn't, which is the good news because it transferred into a temporary housing or place for people to have all the goods, and we were a food distribution and supply distribution center. The ice was utilized to keep things cold that needed to be cold, that was perishable, because it was one of the last locations in town that had fuel or a source to be able to do so, and worked with lots of community groups to be able to facilitate this. Of course, with these events, unfortunately, many of our staff were challenged with getting to and from where they needed to be as well, depending on where they were in the event, and that makes things always challenging. But working together helped everyone rise to the occasion, and we were able to distribute food and provide showers for those in need in the community. Next slide, please. You'll see where it's tidied up a little bit more. And all of that, those goods were moved in and out of there in about the course of about 3 days. Next slide, please. So currently, I just wanted to mention at the Hope Recreation Center, so while this event is done, we're continuing from January 3rd on till today, actually. We're open as a warming center, so there's definitely always ability to respond to community needs, and that's currently finishing up today at the Recreation Center. So working with community, I think, is probably some of the highlights that our staff teams took away from this, and just wanted to give you that little overview and some of the highlights of things that we experienced through these particular events. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Good, thank you, Ms. Devine, and directors. Welcome. Any questions or comments?
Dixon?
Oh, go ahead, Director Dixon.
Again, I mean, I'd heard about it, but it was, thank you for the presentation because seeing all those boxes all stacked up and obviously it was just a huge need for the community, and it sounds like FERD staff and all the others involved did a really good job of meeting that need. So thanks for the presentation and thanks for your work.
Good, thank you, Director Dixon. I just, Ms. Vuktavine, this morning, Mayor Rob had a lot of concerns about the Othello operation. My understanding, that's a provincial park. Do we have any kind of responsibility in regards to the Othello operation?
No, Othello is a provincial park. However, we do operate the Kettle Valley Rail Trail as well as Thacker Regional Park, which are right in the same area and sort of line up together. So generally, what happens is if something's happening in one area, we're looking at a larger area in consultation and together and trying to see where we can collaborate. As it pertains to that particular area, we are in talks with our counterparts at BC Parks. Some of the infrastructure like the KVR trail that we're working on, people will have access to the Othello tunnels, etc. And also people will park there and come our way. So certainly it's those areas are large highlights and interconnected in the community. So we are working together with the province as well as BC Parks just to talk about those areas and what kind of collaborations we can do to help get those open where they're not safely for the public.
Good, thank you for the explanation. Other directors, anything to add? Hearing none, I will turn things back to Ms. Kinnaman. Thank you again, Ms. Vuktavine.
Thank you, Chair Dickey. So moving to item 9.1, which is the Electoral Area Directors and Local Government Leadership Academy Forums from April 5th to April 8th, 2022. There's a motion for your consideration.
Looking for a motion. Move Director Raymond, second.
Adams.
Director Dixon, seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Contrary, motion carries.
Item 10.1 is the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, Green Infrastructure Environmental Quality Program. There's a motion for your consideration.
Motion, Director Dixon, I would expect.
Yeah.
Seconder.
Adamson.
Second, Director Adamson. Any discussion?
Dixon.
Go ahead, Director Dixon.
Well, I must say we're persistent. So thanks again to the staff for the work and getting another grant application in. And obviously we have to have our toes crossed on this one as well. So there you go, fingers and toes.
So is this third time lucky or more?
I think it's number 5 or 6, maybe.
I think that's closer. For this particular program, it might only be the second attempt, but I think it might be the 5th or 6th grant application.
Yeah.
Patience is a virtue, I'm told. It's not one of my virtues. Discussion, seeing none, all in favor, contrary, motion carries.
Item 11.1 is an information item. It's the Harrison Mills Neighborhood Plan Progress Update. The staff are happy to answer any questions.
Any discussion? I sat in on the meeting just as an observer. Really would like to thank the staff. I believe it was Hasib and Mr. Bennett and Mr. Danilus that were present. And I think they did a really great job of encouraging community participation in the neighborhood plan. And they responded with a lot of sensitivity to the concerns that were raised by the community members. So thank you very much for that work. Director Bales, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I sat on the plan too. I thought it was well done. Some concerns for sure. Like for instance, why the parks aren't international but it's like they didn't realize that our parks have gone gone regional.
Regional, maybe.
Yeah, so
Mhm.
that was one thing that was missed out. And I think it's early days and well, fairly early days. So there's a lot of stuff that needs to come out. So.
Okay, good. Thank you for your comments, Director Bales. It's obviously a very important initiative in your area. So it'll be interesting to see this move forward. Any other discussion? Seeing none. Pardon me? Is that just an information item?
Yes, that's just an information
Yeah.
item.
Okay, then so we'll move forward.
So moving to 11.2, we have Rogers Communications Facility, Othello South, Mount Hope Forest Service Road, and Electoral Area B. There's a motion for your consideration.
Good, thank you. That would appear
Move, Adamson.
for Adamson issue. Seconder,
Stobart.
Director Stobart seconds. Any discussion? Director Adamson?
No, I'm encouraged to see this. This will help with, excuse me, it'll help with safety on the Highway 5, and it'll get some of these people that are out nowhere, maybe hopefully they connect up to it as well. It's a good thing coming. I just, the same usual stuff, check with everybody, the First Nations and other people, but I will support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Adamson. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Contrary, motion carries.
11.3 is the Subdivision and Development Servicing Amendment Bylaw number 1644.
Okay, motion.
Move, Adamson.
Move Director Adamson, second Director Dixon. Any discussion?
Davidson?
Go ahead, Director Davidson.
Thank you, Chair. This item generated some interesting discussion in my community, and I think it was out of context, but it does lead to where we may be going with the consolidated zoning bylaw. The resident expressed concern that in going from a 0.225 minimum lot size to a 0.2 hectare minimum lot size, that would, create densification and related challenges around that, running sort of contrary to the rural character theme that most of us prefer in this area. But the reality is, for area C, F, and G zoning bylaw right now, the minimum lot size is 0.5 hectare anyway, so that the whole area concern was out of context. It's moot today. But as we move forward into the consolidated zoning bylaw, my concern would be is that if, as we must have in some other electoral areas, we have zones that 0.2 and 0.225 or whatever hectare are valid, they now become available for rezoning applications in the area F. It's unlikely that such an application would get much support from the community, but it is likely that an application would generate a lot of anxiety in the community. So as we move forward to the consolidated zoning bylaw, I'd be looking to get some sort of blanket minimum lot size for area F that's consistent with the current zoning bylaw. And this is basically what came out of this lot size change in the subdivision amendment. I apologize for going off topic. I don't know if staff have any comments on it though going forward, because it is about the consolidated zoning bylaw, not about the motion on the board, the motion before us right now. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Kinnaman, is there a staff person that would like to comment on this?
We could certainly turn it over to our planning team, but I'm not sure that they're prepared to have a conversation about something that wasn't on the agenda.
Yeah,
Totally fair.
Through the chair, I'd be happy to respond to that comment. First off, thank you. Appreciate getting a better understanding of the community's sensitivities in area F. Our consolidated zoning bylaw, my initial comment is that I don't believe it'll be changing the parcel sizes in area F, but I think a very fair thing for us to do would be to produce what I'll call a table of concordance existing zones to new zones under the consolidated zoning bylaw. So you can see that in what was the rural zone under the former zoning bylaw and the parcel size was 5 acres, what is it under the new zone? And it will just be very transparent about any changes in parcel size, no matter how small. And then all the facts will be on the table, and the residents can respond accordingly. Does that sound like a reasonable follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Daniels. I think it's reasonable and necessary, but I'm going a little bit further than that. In that today, for example, an applicant cannot apply for a rezoning in area F for smaller than 0.5 hectares. When we get to the consolidated zoning bylaw, that'll change, because now there'll be new bylaws available in that new zones available in that consolidated zoning bylaw that allow for smaller lot sizes than are available today. And I'm thinking, rather than have prospective applicants look at that and say, oh, great, I can apply for a denser lot density than I could before, only to be, generate community opposition on probably a large scale. Can we just make certain lot sizes unavailable to area F? And other directors may have similar thoughts, I don't know, so that we don't have to go through that application process, public hearing process, to talk about smaller lot sizes that are going to generate a lot of opposition anyway.
Oh, thank you, Director Davidson. If I may, through the chair, respond. That really helps me understand the point that was being made. Thank you for that. It's really our community plans that set the parameters for changes in zoning. And if our community plans don't support smaller lot sizes, any rezoning application that came forward that proposed a small lot size would also need a community plan amendment. And of course, our residents have a right to make applications and have the board consider their proposal. And what I'd suggest, though, what I do say to applicants is that if they're asking for something that's not consistent with the community plan, they certainly ought to expect a much more difficult path in front of them to convince the community that that's a suitable density. The fact that the current zoning bylaw doesn't include zones for smaller lot sizes is not a barrier at all to anyone making that kind of application. As I mentioned, residents have a right to make and have the board consider the applications, whatever application the resident wishes to make, and we can introduce new zones to bylaws in response to applications, as needed. So I think I understand the concern. I understand that the concern is some residents may be concerned that a consolidated zoning bylaw, which contains on-the-shelf zones, so to speak, for small lot sizes, that somebody might come and propose those zones be introduced to Hatzic Valley. That is certainly the case. Someone could propose those zones, but I would suggest that the very presence of those zones in the zoning bylaw doesn't make that any more likely than what the circumstances we face presently. And it's really the community plan that sets the stage for changes in zoning. And we ought to look to our community plan policies to make sure they reflect the community's desires for the future and any concerns that they might have with smaller lot sizes or the desire for some kind of cap on lot size minimums.
Thank you very much. That's great.
Thank you, Director Davidson. As my understanding, Mr. Daniels could comment on this, but there's no way that under a new consolidated zoning bylaw that where a property that previously could be subdivided to 0.5 hectare level, under the new bylaw, there's not a chance that it'll be allowed to be subdivided to 0.2 hectare level without a rezoning.
Thank you, Director Dickey. That's absolutely correct.
Okay, thank you. Unless Director Davidson has something else to add, we'll move forward.
No, thank you, Chair.
Good. So I believe we need to vote on the matter. Is that correct, Ms. Kinnaman?
That's correct.
Yep, so all those in favor? Contrary, motion carries.
Next is 11.4, which is cash in lieu of park dedication for the proposed subdivision of 49096 Chilliwack Lake Road in Electoral Area E. And I would just like to note for the committee that from the time of the agenda being published to today, staff wanted to make an alteration to the motion for consideration. And so I would just ask staff to put that up on the screen. And they will speak to it. So if we just want to turn things over to our planning team to clarify the change.
Oh, thank you, Jennifer and Chair. Could I ask our Manager of Planning, Mr. Asid Nadvi, to comment on this matter?
Thank you, Chair, to the committee. So this is the 7-lot subdivision at 49096 Chilliwack Lake Road under Section 510 of the Local Government Act. There is a parkland dedication requirement when you go over 3 lots. Or otherwise, in lieu of the parkland dedication, you can accept a cash in lieu payment. In this case, and that payment is usually only for parkland acquisition. In this case, what we're doing is we're accepting a voluntary offer from the applicant, which means that we could use because it's a voluntary offer, we could use it not only for parkland acquisition, but also for future improvements in Electoral Area E.
Good, thank you, Mr. Nadvi. Directors, do you have any questions or comments?
Yes, I do, Chair, please.
Go ahead, Director Engar.
I note that there were some concerns from the adjacent properties around these 7 new lots being upstream from existing wells. And I think some frustration as well from the folks living there that they didn't have actual public input opportunity because the province seems to be running the show on subdivisions. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, but I'm wondering if there's been an update on the concerns around the wells and flow of water from these new properties going towards existing properties. Through you, Chair, to the staff, please.
Yeah, Mr. Nadvi, did you want to respond to that, or is that Mr. Daniels?
I can respond to that, Director Dickey, the Chair of Director Enger. The stormwater management plan is part of the subdivision approval process, and Minister of Transportation has required a stormwater management plan before the subdivision can be approved. They would also need Fraser Health approval for the wells or on-site water and septic. So these are provisions that are in place before the subdivision can be approved.
So to follow up then, we're not approving anything other than saying, yes, we'll take some money in lieu of parkland, and the individual provincial authorities then will make the approvals, and we really don't have any further say. Is that correct?
That is correct. The approving officers in Minister of Transportation, we do make recommendations for our subdivision and servicing bylaw that they would have to meet certain servicing requirements, and which would include water and sewer or septic system in this case, and at times stormwater management plans.
So we've looked at the septic system arrangement here, I'm assuming, and there must have been feedback going to the province, but I'm not privy to that. Were there any concerns voiced to the province in that regard?
We forwarded, I remember there were some concerns that was raised now that'll be 3-4 months back from some in the neighboring residents. Those were forwarded off to the Minister of Transportation and Fraser Health. And prior to the subdivision approval, the Fraser Health approval needs to be in place. They look at the on-site septic system, but those comments were forwarded off to both the agencies.
Okay, that's good to know. I guess the only outstanding issue for me is the optics are I'm a little uneasy with the optics of accepting cash in lieu of parkland payment. probably because most people won't understand the parkland payment provision and may see it differently. It's because there was objections around this new subdivision going in and really no public process opportunity for the residents to have a formal feedback. So in agreeing to this, my concern is that it would potentially send a signal that the FVRD is on board with everything and go for it. So I just want to make darn sure that those concerns are being addressed. So I'm not sure the best way forward here, but if you have any further feedback, that would help me out in making a decision of whether or not to approve this. Does that make sense? Am I clear on that?
Yeah. I'm not sure about the question. I guess the question is about whether or not we're, instead of the parkland dedication itself, we're accepting cash in lieu. And there may be resident concerns that we're not accepting actual land and we're just accepting cash on behalf or in lieu.
I think it's a little bit different than that, in that they would see the fact that they have been left out of the loop, and not by our choice. Obviously, it's my understanding correctly, it's the province that doesn't give the public input on new subdivisions. So if that's correct, then the folks that are worried about the impacts to their existing wells from 7 new septic fields, possibly right next door, they would perhaps look at this and say, yeah, why is the FVRD going along with this for some money? So I struggle with it, to tell you the truth, and I don't know what the best way forward is.
You're correct, Director Enger, that the system in the Land Title Act or the Local Government Act, the way subdivision approvals are set up for regional districts, Minister of Transportation approves them. Having said that, the approving officer from Minister of Transportation could consider public interest requests or inputs. So in that case, I would suggest they could write to FVRD or to the approving officer. We could forward those comments to Minister of Transportation and their approving officer for consideration. That would be one avenue.
And can we do that before deciding whether we would accept the cash in lieu parkland payment provision?
The cash in lieu parkland provision, it's separate from the well and septic. So staff recommendation would be that we keep those separate. In the cash in lieu for a parkland provision doesn't mean the subdivision is approved. So after this resolution goes through, there's still an opportunity for us to receive those comments and for us to forward them to Minister of Transportation, or it could directly go to Minister of Transportation approving officer.
I would prefer if we could defer this cash in lieu parkland payment until after we hear what the province decides to do with the subdivision. In which case, then it would not look like we're tacitly approving the subdivision to those people that are worried, and give them a little space until the province comes back with their verdict. Does that make sense?
In this, that is the decision of the committee at this point. The only other thing I would like to mention is the reason there's no provisions for public input in this case is because the OCP and the zoning amendment supports this this type of density in this neighborhood. So they do meet the minimum lot size, and hence if they didn't meet the minimum lot size, we'd need to go through a public input and rezoning or OCP amendment process. And this is not the case here.
If I could add, my understanding of the situation, Director Engar, is that when these people came with proposal to make this 7-lot subdivision, they already had the zoning in place. So that the province dictates the procedure, and if the zoning is in place, that's like somebody wanting to build a home on their piece of property. The neighbors don't get a chance to weigh in on whether that will be permitted or not. If they meet the provincial legislation, they have the right to build a 7-lot subdivision. The question around the spacing between septic fields and wells, that's governed by the province also through the Fraser Health System. They have very definite rules on the separation between septic fields and wells, and they will not approve the subdivision if they don't meet those parameters. I'm not sure that helps, but that's my understanding.
Chair
That does help.
Dickey, Chair Dickey, if I could just jump in for one quick second. Just a procedural matter. We did just want to bring forward that there was a slight change to the motion for consideration, but we didn't actually get a mover and a seconder to have any fulsome discussion. So
Okay,
I might suggest we do that first before we go any further.
okay,
Adamson
looking for a
moved.
motion. Looking for a motion.
Yep, so
Adamson
moved.
moved.
Director
Second.
Adamson moves, second
Second, Director Angar.
Director Engar, discussion.
Very good. No, I appreciate the feedback, Director Chair Dickey, but I would still rather see this cash in lieu parkland payment provision after the fact that the province has said, yes, they're good with everything and everything's all right and they're going to go ahead, rather than looking like we have an influence on it going ahead or not at this stage. So if this could possibly be deferred, that would be my preference. If you could, through you, Chair, to our CAO, if that's a potential here, then let me know.
Sure, let me just
Go
ask
ahead.
us. Oh,
Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Kinnaman.
yeah, I was just going to ask Hasib if, in terms of process with the province and when applications go forward, is this dedication of parkland or offer of cash in lieu an expectation to be seen as part of an application? Or if Director Enger wished to defer this until a later date, is that a possibility?
It could be a possibility that the committee could not make a decision, but the Parkland dedication is a local government act requirement. So prior to the subdivision approval, this would need to be approved either in terms of land or cash in lieu. So this would mean that the decision or the subdivision approval would be deferred or delayed.
I see.
Well, the complication I'm expecting here is that the approving officer, MOTI, he will not wait on the parkland or cash in lieu submission, and he cannot wait on his signing off until everything is in place. So if you're wanting this determination to be set back, he's not going to have everything in place. Am I wrong there, Mr. Navji?
No, you're correct, Chair Dickey. The other thing I should mention is the Fraser Health approval for wells and septic systems are quite standard process in the subdivision, and they're usually separate than parkland dedication. So staff recommendation would be to keep them separate because there are separate agencies that are qualified to make those determinations, and the regional district does not make those decisions on these matters.
Right.
Good.
Well,
Director Enger.
as uncomfortable as I am going forward with this, I don't really see an easy solution then. If it's not easily deferred until after they make their decision whether or not to go ahead and the septic fields are approved and everything's hunky-dory, that would be my preference. So if it's not possible, let me know and we'll have to move ahead as is. But if there is a way to say, yes, we'll just defer this until the province comes back with their decision and making sure all the septics are approved, then the community says at least then they know that, that it has been all approved and checked out, and that we're not just sort of rushing things along by accepting parkland payment in lieu of the actual land. Do you follow my concern? I mean, it just, to me on the outside, it looks like
Davidson?
it doesn't have the best optics.
First,
Yeah.
Davidson?
Okay, Director Davidson, go ahead.
So if I'm hearing correctly, then my question to staff would be, if I understand the parkland dedication is a prerequisite to the approving officer at MOTI making their determination, as is the septic determinations are both prerequisites to the MOTI approving officer making a determination. So can we defer the parkland dedication until such time as the septic determination has been made prior to the MOTI approval officer making the overall determination? Is that feasible?
We certainly could, yes.
Oh, very good. Well, thank you for that, Director Davidson. That's a good conclusion. And I would be willing to go along with that if we can make that happen easily.
Adamson wants to talk.
Director Adamson, go ahead.
Okay. I don't, excuse me. I don't think that we can leave it to afterwards. I think the developer figured out that he gets 7 lots without having a park there. But if he has to get a park there, he's going to get less than 7, probably get 6 or half or whatever. So they are giving money instead of that park because they get an extra lot is what's going on here. So, and also, how can the government approve something if they're looking at the plans, it says 7 lots and there's no park? You know, I mean, it's either, I believe that the developers, they do this because it's cheaper. They get more money having the land and building on it than it would be to you know, have a park. So I always seem to think are we getting enough when we take the cash? That's my concern. You know, like I'm having a park built in Yale and we priced it at $205,000 and we already have the land like for free. So this just seems like a low number to me. And I think that's what we have to decide, because, you know, if we say, no, we want a park, they probably got to redo the drawing a bit, you know, and get rid of a lot. Like, so that's all I'm going to say. Like, I think, you know, whatever.
Good. Thank you, Director Adamson. So back to staff, Mr. Nadvi, do you feel comfortable moving forward, deferring this decision until the determination on septic fields and well separation, et cetera, has been carried out?
I do, Chair Dickey, and that would be fine. If I could respond through you to Director Adamson's question, there's some clarification I would like to provide. If that's okay.
Sure, go ahead, please.
The parkland dedications or the location of the parks are actually set out in the official community plan of every electoral area. In this case, there's no, the OCP does not identify any new parks in the neighborhood or in that community. So, and also the other thing we need to remember is every park dedication requires maintenance and service area, and we have to assign some of those funds. So in this case, since there is nothing in the OCP that talks about the need for a new park in the community, we thought a cash in lieu for improvements or otherwise would be better in this case.
Good, thank you, Mr. Nadvi. And if I could add, I think the thinking behind this, Mr. Nadvi's already explained it very nicely, but if we took a parkland contribution for each of these small subdivisions, we would have community parks scattered all over, and the operational and maintenance costs of running them would be overwhelming and not particularly well planned. That's my understanding of this.
Yeah,
Well,
Mayor.
Yeah, go ahead, Director Engar.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. And thank you, Mr. Nadvi. I appreciate that feedback. And I would like then to defer until we see if it's MOTI or whoever it is that does the septic fields, make sure there's no issues there. And then I'd be happy to go ahead with this. Thank you.
Good, so that's a motion to defer.
Correct.
Okay, so looking to staff procedurally.
Have a seconder on that one, Chair Dickey?
Okay, so Director Engar moves, second Director Davidson. Discussion on the deferral only. Hearing none, all those in favor? Contrary, motion carries.
Thank you, Chair Dickey. So next we would move down to item 14, which is reports by electoral area directors.
Okay, and we will start with Director Angar.
Well, thank you. Boy, what a nice way to get rid of 2021. Are we ever glad that's gone? If it's not heat domes, it's atmospheric rivers and the plague, as Chair Dickey said earlier on, the plague. Oh my goodness, we've really been up against it this last year, and hopefully this next year is better, and wishing everybody a happy new year. Not a lot to add other than I'll be continuing to work with my community and help those who have been really hit hard by this whole event. Some people that have actually lost their homes, and others that have they're uninhabitable because of severe sliding potential. Really is a big challenge for some of these folks, and my heart goes out to them all. And I'm sure we all feel similarly that we want to make sure we do everything we can to help them going forward. So thank you, and God bless us all in the new year.
Thank you, Director Angar. Director Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, Happy New Year, everybody. It's been, people have been cleaning up, still trying to dig themselves out from all of the atmospheric river and the gravel, and road repairs are still needing to be done. So it's there's a lot of work still to do as we kind of, I guess, ramp up into 2022. I don't really have too much to say. I do have a question though, that has absolutely nothing to do with the agenda, but I'm curious. Am I able to ask a question?
Please do.
Well, the other day when I was looking for a new job, I noticed, actually, I was looking at the FVRD Come Work With Us thing, and I noticed a whole bunch of positions available for the animal care. Is that because contracts have ended? I was just kind of curious where those all came from, and we haven't quite completed our budget, so I'm not sure if it's appropriate to ask that now or not, or to answer now.
Perhaps since there isn't an item on the agenda, perhaps I could just follow up with you after this meeting. Would that be okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
Good. Thank you, Director Dixon. Your interest in dog catcher type work? I think I think that already falls under your umbrella as an electoral area.
Yeah, I have one of those nets,
Director Adamson.
Yeah, well, the canyon is obviously, as everybody knows, is going through a rough now. We can't drive north, but in Yale, we can't drive north, but we can drive south. I was with CP yesterday, and they sent up two, I actually don't remember what they're called, high somethings. They're not the trucks that go on the railroad. Does anybody know what that's called? A high something? No, doesn't matter. Two trucks that go on the railroad full of groceries and medicine and stuff. CP sent it up to Spuzzum, Boston Bar, and Boothroyd, just because, good neighbors. Like, they want to be good neighbors. I was told by one of my neighbors who apparently measured it, we had 9 feet of snow in 5 days in Yale. But it was mostly fluffy, so it was okay there for a while. But then, the rain and everything got heavy. People were up shoveling off roofs. I think I heard of three structures collapsing, like that. Sorry, I lost my thought there. Yeah, okay. So the snow. Other than that, the community center, we're trying to get it going. It's hard because, like, COVID, we still got the restrictions on people, and nobody's really sure what they can do. I'm finding that most of the people, I'm sure it's everywhere, and it's just because of all this disaster, that they're so nervous. When it rains, everybody starts thinking flood, and when it snows, we think avalanche. It's just we're all, I think, all to the point we're just on our nerves, like on edge every time the weather. I never thought that I would worry when it starts raining. You drive down highway when it starts raining, but then you start thinking of what the damage the water can do. It's amazing. I think that I'm hoping that this will be good. Yeah, I'm sure it will be. I got a few ideas that I want to work with staff and get it done, and work with you guys, hopefully get it pushed through. And I'm looking forward to it. If we can just keep positive and look ahead instead of looking back, except for the lessons we need to learn, we got to look for them. I think it'll be a great year for the organization. Thank you.
Good, thank you, Director Adamson. 9 feet of snow. I had no idea. Wow. Director Stobart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, Happy New Year, everybody. It's good to see all the faces again. It's been, I don't know, it's just been weird, that's for sure. Our Area G, we're fortunate, we didn't lose houses or, people didn't lose homes. We had some flooded basements and things like that. And some of the farmland was affected, but nothing too serious and nothing that won't be overcome. So people are getting pretty much back to normal. Our Highway 7 definitely took a beating with, I don't know, whatever it was, 3,000 semis a day going over the highway. We've still got some massive potholes out there in a few locations. If you're coming through the Roche at the crossing, keep your eyes open or you'll be leaving a set of wheels behind, because it's a good thing you've got to slow to make that fast corner, because it's pretty ugly right there. I guess other than that, it looks like the Dudley Bridge repair or replacement is still going ahead. I think a little bit of a delay. It's going to be probably 1 year longer, but it looks like the work is continuing on that right now. And yeah, the weather, a couple years ago, it was, what was it, polar whatever. And then, I mean, I'm sure the media will come up with, and they'll key on another new slogan next year to scare us all with, so we'll all buy more soap. It's, it's been kind of a never ending. They used to call it a rainstorm, and then it became a Pineapple Express. And then, well, it's only a Pineapple Express, but it's over 10 degrees Celsius and on. And again, that's their job, is to make us watch and buy stuff. So I'm sure there'll be some more, but it does get repetitive. So if I never hear atmosphere ever, at least for another week, I would be very happy. Very happy. I'd also like to, it also kind of goes hand in hand with, we become not overly cautious, but again, when you get bombarded by so many different outlets, whether it's online or whether it's TV or whether it's radio, as Director Addison suggested, it takes a toll on you, and it's because you're hearing it all the time. And when we start getting warnings about 300 days of the year, it kind of, I don't know, I think we're in danger of having that little boy who cried wolf syndrome pop up here, because it's certainly getting monotonous. But anyhow, other than that, the cows are content.
Rare to hear Director Stobart sound that frustrated. That's of note. Thank you, Director Stobart. Director Raymond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I just want to say thank you to Chair Dickey and Vice Chair Stobart for sitting in on those chairs again. I appreciate the fact that you've done that and understand all the work that you do behind the scenes that we don't realize that you're doing for us. So thank you. The other is Boston Bar has, well, I don't know, some people say 6, 7 feet, but with the rain has come down to 5 feet of snow. One of the biggest concerns there is once the highway shut down, we're shut down on both sides, the Emergency Health Services Commission and their wise decisions pulled the ambulance crew out of town. So we had no emergency medical services whatsoever. I've been trying to get an answer as to why that was done. And I know that Director Facio is, the mayors are meeting with Fraser Health, and he is going to bring that topic up there. And I thank him very much for that. I would also like to thank staff at the EOC for information that they fed to me on what is going on up there, because I'm not up there. I am still in mission. And also BC Hydro. I know we had a long outage in the canyon, but I really have to hand it to the crews with BC Hydro in how fast they respond to things in such extreme conditions, and to get that electricity flowing back into that community. And it's amazing to think what they had to go through. The CNCP has also been very good for us. They've delivered, as Director Adamson had said, they've brought groceries up. They've also brought medicines into town that were needed. And thanks to them as well. The ambulance service is a big concern that's going on right now, and I intend fully to follow up on it. Something has to be done with it. So again, thank you, and Happy New Year, and all the best wishes to all.
Good, thank you, Director Raymond. That's a large community to be without any medical services, especially considering the transportation closures that so often plague Boston bars. So let us know if there's anything we can do to help out with the situation. Thanks again, Director Bales, go ahead.
Happy New Year to everybody. And likewise, I've had a lot of power outages, but other than that, Area C has been relatively unfettered or mostly unfettered. But it'll be interesting. I'm on the flood committee this year. That the last year I was on it, I wasn't on it. There was no flood committee. So it'll be interesting if there is a flood committee, and I'll be interested in learning what I can do if there is one. I guess that's it, except for there was a few comments basically when I got back from the hospital, and I forwarded them on, and mostly to do with Lake Eoc and a little bit of debris in the lake, well, a lot of debris in the lake, but yeah, that's about it.
Good, thank you, Director Bales. And once again, it's so good to see you back amongst us. There were a lot of us very concerned about your welfare, so thank you. And Director Davidson, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I feel like I gotta reply a little bit to Director Stobart's comments. You know, I appreciate and share the sentiments around, you know, fatigue and stress and everything that comes along with recent weather. But we've seen regional heat records smashed. We've seen regional rainfall records smashed. Records are changing, you know, all over the area and all over the world, and things are changing. And I think we're picking up a new vocabulary to reflect that change. And while it may be tiresome and stressful, I think it is necessary, and hopefully it leads to constructive action. Anyway, for Area F, what can we say? Many of the same challenges that other areas are facing. Our roads are a mess. Some of them are underwater again today. But I think generally we're probably coming out of it less affected than some and more affected than others. We do have, you know, flood damage and everything to recover from, and yeah, the road ahead is challenging for sure. But thank you.
Good, thank you, Director Davidson. And for myself, our community has been quite quiet relative to other electoral areas. Just recently, I've had issues with the snow plowing. We've got a number of elderly residents, and the road contractor has trouble clearing the entrances to their driveways, and some of them have been locked into their houses for 10 days now. I'm thinking more and more about how we can work to try and make this a better situation for them. I think we're going to see a lot more people aging in place as the baby boomers advance. And I think that's in the interest of all of us if we can keep people out of institutions and keep them in their homes. So the elderly are important, mainly because I'm about to become one. So hope we can do something for them. Other than that, it's been quiet in electoral area D. So I will turn things back to Ms. Kinnaman.
Thank you, Chair Dickey. So now is the time for public question period for items relevant to the agenda. And I will just look to Jamie Van Ness in our boardroom as to whether or not we have any members of the public either in the boardroom, online, or if they submitted any questions in advance.
Good afternoon. I'm joining you from the boardroom where we are open to the public. We do not have any members of the public with us today. We have not received any written questions. However, we do have two people who have joined us on the line today through Zoom. There's an Anna and an Aaron, both joining us today. And if either one of you would like to ask a question, I would get you to just hit that raise hand function to indicate that you have a question that you would like to ask the committee. And this would be a question that is relevant to items on the agenda. Maybe just give our online participants a moment to find that raise hand function if they are interested in asking a question. And it would appear that our attendees do not have a question today, so we can move on to the next item.
And that takes us to a motion for adjourn, Chair Dickey.
Thank you, Ms. Kinnaman. A motion that we can adjourn.
Dixon.
Director
Endor.
Dixon, second Director Raymond.
Endor.
Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, contrary, motion carries. Thank you, staff. Thank you, directors.